Alright, welcome. This, I don't know, paint and skin. It's stuff. No. This is less of a, I use this recipe and more of a, this is a process. Looking at some examples of completed stuff that I've done. So, a couple of the Inu Kingdoms, and then this was recorded when I was still working on the Red Academic from Mindworks. And I think it's, Thanatos, which is still a work in progress, which is so much fun. But yeah, this is more of a process rather than a I use this color, I use that color, because color when it comes to skin doesn't matter. It can be whatever colors we really like. It's more of a this is the decision making process, and I use one of the reliefs from the mini sketchpad, mini painting sketchpad Kickstarter that was done a couple of months back. I will show what colors I used for it, but again, it's not really necessary. Colors aren't all that important. The main thing is lighting, getting your lighting correct, and yeah, your lighting's the most important thing I find anyway. Level of refinement is personal choice. I don't over refine this one at all. I kind of keep it quite sketchy just for making it as easy as possible to follow what I'm doing. But yeah, it's simple black primer. Not really anything special. Everyone should know how to prime stuff. Use a rattle can or airbrush. Just don't do it by brush, because that's just stupid. So the first two colours that I do use, I'm using a 50-50 mix, which is not about the like ratio, it's more about the where the final hue sits. So I um, use I try to get it to a spot that's kind of like in between the first two colors, and this is sort of my bit darker than mid-tone, and then it's just a base coat, nice full coverage across the entire surface of the skin. Um, don't need to be tidy. I don't know why I'm so particular about it to begin with, but then I'm like, it doesn't matter. The hair will get repainted when I get around to painting the hair. The eyes will get repainted when I get around to painting the eyes. So I usually start off with the skin when I'm working on a piece, so it doesn't need to be clean and tidy. It just needs to be done. Done to thin coats, I guess. But yeah, solid opaque coverage at the end is what you want, and yeah, just blocking all of the skin. Um, is worth starting to think about where you want to place light. Um, just helps overall. work it in. Standard stuff. Know how to put down a base coat, I'm sure. So, next step after getting decent opaque coverage is just plain pink flesh. All the paints I use for this are the Scale Artist range. I predominantly just use Scale Artist and Chimera paints. Started using some AK 3rd gen, but it's mostly all Scale Artist and Chimera. This step I'm sketching, not worrying about refinement or anything like that. I'm just sketching out light placement across the entire face. I'll then move down. At this stage, I'll move down to the what do you call it? The upper torso. But yeah, it's a very rough sketch at this point, just picking out where the light's hitting. Being fairly quick about it, not worrying too much if everything makes sense at this stage, because refinement and adjustments will be made along the way. Basically, you just want this step to be brighter than your mid-tone. Well, this is sort of your mid-tone. The first step, the base coat, like I said, was a bit darker than your mid-tone. This is probably more closer to your mid-tone. But you're just making that jump up at this point. Not worrying about how smooth your transitions are or anything. It's just light placement. Need to remember that with skin, a lot of your highlights will land where skin stretches over muscle and bone underneath. So like across the nose, across the brow, the cheekbones, the jawline, the chin. Tendons in the neck, collarbones, shoulders, that sort of thing. That they're going to be your brightest points. Keep in mind which direction your light's coming in from. So as you can see, I've picked from the right side coming across, which is why you get the triangular shape on the left side of the face, because it protrudes out and catches a bit. A lot of people will just leave that incomplete shadow when in fact it will actually catch a decent amount. but even the things in shadow still need to be highlighted. But we'll get more to that later on. So once I got that first sketch out, we now go to the next step, which is pink flesh and light skin. Again, looking for that sort of 50-50 mix between the two. Not like 1-to-1 mix ratio, but a tone and value that is roughly halfway between the two. So in this case, I use more light flesh than pink flesh. But depending on the colors that you use, whichever one's more vibrant and whichever one's more saturated, you'll probably have to use less of. That's just because, when you're mixing colors, you're generally going up in steps. You're not looking for ratio differences, because ratio differences, if you try to substitute any colors with it, it's not always going to translate correctly. So it's better to think of it as a percentage wise between the two values and hues that you're going for. In this stage, we're reducing the size of the focal point. In this case, the eyes are the focal point of the piece. Generally speaking, when doing full busts or 75mm, 54mm, even 32-28mm stuff for tabletop, you generally speaking, the face will be your focal point. For this one, the focal point is the eyes. So we first bring up the skin, the values for light placement around the focal points, and then we work out, okay, we've still got several more steps to go in the highlighting process, so we can push it out further. But when you're planning all this out, the further away from the focal point, the less of a highlight you're going to have. But yeah, this is another sketching stage. Before we start to refine. When we get to refinement, it's just glazing is what I generally do. Still in that scratchy sort of brush strokes of lines and stuff. I personally like to see brush strokes. A lot of people see painting miniatures being like, need to get it to as realistic as possible, whereas I see it as no, I'm painting this. I want to show that I've painted it. I like to see the brushstrokes. That's why I like a lot of like Craftworld Studio or Big Dino, um, Maskland Miniatures. They're the sort of painters that I really enjoy, because I've got that more painterly style. You can see the brushstrokes that they put into things. You can. It feels a lot more expressive. Yeah, words are hard. Um, but yeah, this stage is sketching out your next highlight, and then going into refinement and just sort of starting to smoothen out some of those transitions. Um, yeah, it's fairly straightforward. It's just the light skin by itself at this point. Um, you can start making adjustments if you find you need to, but there's still plenty of time. And even when you finish the skin and you start doing other aspects of the model, you'll find that your light might shift slightly, or you might find that the skin's too warm for the overall tone of the piece, or it's too cold for the overall tone of the piece, and you can always come back and make more adjustments. Um, Again, this is more of a process explanation rather than a this is the paints that you use. Like, if you use these paints, excellent, you'll be able to get a nice looking skin. Um, it's a very basic like recipe for skin, this one. I tend to usually like to throw in more ambient colours, purples, magentas, blues, greens, all that sort of stuff. But this is a very straightforward sort of basic Caucasian skin tone. So next up, after doing the first refinement and adjustment, start doing the first shadow sketch. So I take so at the beginning I had the red ochre and the pale skin to create the bit darker than mid-tone. I now just take the straight red ochre and we start sketching in the first shadow. It's basically the opposite of what we were doing with the light sketch, though I'm leaving very little of that mid-tony mix that we started with between the shadow and the light. It's the basic sketching again. There's not a lot of work that needs to be done. You kind of just blocking in all of the shadow. I guess the main thing at this stage to think about is probably making sure if there's any of the like black undercoat showing through, kind of covering that up as much as possible now, because very soon you start to just work in glazes as you refine and render everything. But yeah, you also need to remember that as good as like the Games Workshop style of painting of base shade highlight, layer highlight is, they teach you to highlight all your raised edges and shade all your recesses. And for tabletop stuff, that's fantastic. It looks excellent on a table 2 feet away. It makes everything nice and readable and all that. But when it comes to display stuff, you've got to think more realistically, and a lot of the time light will end up in a lot of the recesses as well as on the raised areas, and there will be raised areas that are in shadow. The other thing is, which just goes against everything that GW says, so you've got to really think about where the light's hitting and what's actually going to be in shadow. The other thing to recognize and understand is shadows are black, but where we see light in shadows, that is conducive of the environment around what we're looking at. So if a surface in shadow is cool, then there will be light bouncing off a cool surface hitting that area in shadow. That makes it cool. So the idea that there is always contrast between light and dark, there is always contrast between the warm and cool tones in your highlights and in your shadows, in your light and in your shadows, is not necessarily correct, because it depends on what's happening in the environment around them. It's a nice contrast to have in there, but it's not always the correct contrast to have in there. Especially if you're going for a realistic sort of piece, that contrast is not always going to be a thing. Um, if you want it to be a thing, then yes, but you've got to make it clear, especially with like 75mm and 54mm stuff, you've got to have those cool or warm tones around them to make that realistic. Otherwise, you're just putting cool tones in there for the sake of putting cool tones in there. In this case, we're keeping everything fairly warm. I do start to mix in some blues into the shadows, but it still stays pretty warm. And like you can have warm blues, you can have cool blues, you can have warm reds, you can have cool reds. It's all about the color theory in that part. But yeah, this stage is just sketching out and working on the shadows. And then I start to do some refinement and some more adjustments to light placement and shadow placement. You can see that I'm basically just working on the face at this point. I'm not really worrying about other areas, and that's because I generally work on the face first and then work my way out. But you can do this across the entire model if you wanted. But yeah, I like to work from the face out. I'm pretty good with color matching with mixes and stuff like that, so I'm not too concerned about the skin tones changing as I move on to other areas. But yeah, this is about the halfway mark in the process, and again, it's very much a exercise in light placement and getting those tonal differences between your shadows and your lights. Yeah. So after we do a bit more of the refinement and adjustments, we go into the third sketch of the highlights. So we're going back to the highlights now. Just doing straight light skin, and again this is just a more refinement. Getting the sketch in more focused as well. So focusing more in around the eyes and across the bridge of the nose and across the top of the cheekbones. But really pushing that pigment towards where the light's coming from. You'll also notice that the eyes now painted in. They haven't been finished, but it's just weird looking at a model with black eyes, so I tend to just block them in so it's a little less creepy looking. Yeah, it's a very straightforward step, this one. It's straight in for the sketch. And then it's just a bit of refinement afterwards. Afterwards, it's just a bit of refinement, and then final highlight, which is generally the skin tone, this light skin, or whatever your final final tone that you use, with a bit of white mixed in. You'll find that it desaturates quite a bit, but you can always add in saturation. In this case, I'll get to that later. But yeah, we put in this, we refine it a bit, and then go in with a final highlight. Basically, it's a lot of the same rinse and repeat steps. Glazing in, sketching in, glazing in, sketching in, glazing in, sketching in, back and forth. Making sure that you're just getting that light placement correct. No really a lot to say about it. If after watching this you've still got questions, you can find me on Twitch, and always welcome to ask questions there. Get an explanation live, but I'm not sure what else to say about this step, because yeah, it's refining, it's sketching in that light placement, getting the adjustments right, and working it to a level of refinement that you want. I probably could have refined it at this stage a bit more, but for the sake of ease and me being lazy, which is a common thing, I just went, nah, fuck it, let's keep going. So after doing the final highlight and a bit more refinement, I go into the second shadow color. This is a probably about a 50-50 again, halfway between. No, but probably a bit more a 60-40 red ochre over the dark Prussian blue for the final shadow. And it's, yeah, just now working in that final shadow, trying to get it to look as correct as possible. And you can see that at the moment I'm doing a bit more refinement to make sure that it's all squeaky clean. I put in more saturation before this as well. So for that I mixed a yellow and a red for a sort of peachy orange sort of thing, and just glazed that over the top of everything. All got glazed with that, and it just resaturates everything. That's why I go in and reintroduce some of these highlights, especially around the focal areas, focal points. But yeah, then when it comes to adding in the shadow, it's those deepest shadows that you really want to get done. But yeah, at the moment, just glazing in some of the highlights just to around the eyes, just to refocus on those areas.